I want to switch gears and move to US political developments. Bernie Sanders recently endorsed Biden. Many of the on the left, as wasn't the case with Hillary Clinton in 2016, including figures such as Chomsky, are saying that Biden should be supported as there are more channels available for the public to influence policy as opposed to Trump. In other words, Trump is the greater evil. Whereas on the other parts of the left, I've been looking at, for example, Secular Talk. They're done with this thing of lesser evil and this two-party system and always seeing the political spectrum moving to the right with this sort of, let's say, approach. What is your stance on this issue, and where do your principles draw the line?
So I think the example of Chomsky is a little bit slightly a distraction. I'm as big of a fan of Noam Chomsky as it gets. He's a good friend of mine. I have nothing but the highest admiration for him. But he's this idea that it's the moral responsibility of every citizen to vote for the lesser of two evils, which means in every case the Democratic Party, no matter who they nominate, is not a new view of his. It's been one that he's been advocating and articulating for years, going back at least to the 1980s, when I think it was more defensible, when you had Ronald Reagan and this far-right movement that was very much devoted to laissez-faire economics, to corporate power, to eliminating government social programs that were designed to help the poorest and most marginalized, to attack labor unions. On the one hand, that was the Republican Party. And then on the Democratic Party, even though there was a lot wrong with it, they supported imperialism, they were responsible for the Vietnam War, it was the party of the working class, it was the party of labor unions. The differences from an economic perspective were, and even a military one, a foreign policy one, were pretty stark. Now, after you have the 1990s, in which Bill Clinton very successfully led the effort to transform the Democratic Party from one of the working class to one of Wall Street, Silicon Valley, banks, credit card companies, and the military industrial complex, those differences have diminished greatly, which isn't to say they don't exist any longer. Let's assume that Trump really is the lesser, the worst of the two evils, which I think could be debated, at least in some sectors, though not in others. I think it's a generational divide now where a lot of people on the left are looking and saying, wait a minute, we've been doing this, we've been following this advice for decades, right? We've been following this advice that says, even though we can't stand the Democratic leader, the Democratic Party leadership, even though they believe in things completely anathema to what we believe in, it's still our duty at the end of the day to pledge our unconditional support to them. And I think what people are starting to realize is two things. Number one, when you pledge your unconditional support to politicians, meaning when you say, like Chomsky does, no matter who you pick, no matter how adverse he is to my political ideology and my set of policy preferences, I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to support you. They start to realize that you have no leverage. There's no reason for them to do anything but ignore you with contempt, because you're basically in this subservient position you put yourself in where you say, I don't care how much you trample on my values, I'm still going to vote for you. Why would anybody listen to a group of people who say that? And who say, oh, we want concessions. Why would I give you concessions if you've already told me that at the end of the day, you're going to vote for me anyway? I'm not going to give you concessions. I'll give concessions to the people who may not vote for me, meaning centrists or Republicans or disaffected suburbanites or whatever. So that's one problem with that strategy, is it guarantees your own impotence. And the other problem with it is, where does that end? What's the exit strategy for that? If you continue to empower and support and fortify this neoliberal, corporatist, militarist wing of a party over and over and over again, now we're supporting Al Gore, now we're supporting John Kerry, Barack Obama, who ran on a different platform than his presidency became. Now we're supporting Hillary Clinton. Now we're supporting Joe Biden. What is the point of politics if that's what you're doing? And I think that a lot of people are now reaching the point where, they supported Bernie Sanders because he promised a political revolution against the Democratic and Republican establishments. So to now tell those same people, it's time for you to get behind the very establishment who you thought you were launching a revolution against, is a message that is not landing well for millions of people who probably won't vote for Trump, but may just stay at home or vote for a third party.
Another split that I've been seeing in the left is the criticism on Bernie Sanders. Some people are attributing, not criticism, but his loss in the recent primaries. So some people are attributing this to the media and the shenanigans of the DNC, while others are saying this was clearly Bernie's own making. How do you see this? Should we constructively criticize Bernie Sanders' campaign? Are there internal reasons? Or how would you rank this if we would take the media, the shenanigans of the DNC, or the internal criticisms of Bernie Sanders' strategy?
We have to engage in self-critique and figure out what the Bernie Sanders campaign did wrong. One of the primary criticisms I have of the 2016 Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign was, to this very day, they've never engaged in any self-analysis or critique. In their view, they did nothing wrong. They have a long list of villains that they want to blame, from Vladimir Putin to WikiLeaks, to James Comey, the director of the FBI, to the New York Times, to the media, to the left, to Jill Stein. They want to blame everyone but themselves. That is a very unhealthy way of going through life generally, and a very counterproductive way of trying to engage in political activism specifically. Yes, there are villains that were responsible for Bernie Sanders not being the Democratic nominee, but that's the whole premise of the Bernie Sanders campaign and of the populist left movement generally, which is that the Democratic establishment is corrupt. They do anything to cling to power, so you can't launch a campaign that's designed to wrench power out of the hands of a corrupt establishment, and then when you fail, whine afterwards that the corrupt establishment is corrupt. Of course they are corrupt. That's the reason why a new movement is needed. And yes, of course, the media owned by corporations and billionaires is going to be hostile to a movement of left-wing populism. None of this is a surprise. These are obstacles that have to be overcome, not complained about or whined away. So whatever else is true, Bernie Sanders began in 2020, the 2020 campaign, with a lot of advantages. He had virtually universal name recognition for 2016. He had a funding model that was really revolutionary and actually inspiring, of small donors by the millions donating money and making him not have to rely on corporations and super PACs, but being able to run a very formidable campaign financially. And he had 4 years to figure out how to expand his voting base. He won 43 states out of 23 states out of 50. In 2016, he had 4 years to figure out how to expand his voting base, and he didn't do it. So I think it's madness to say we're not going to ask why, where he went wrong, what could have been done better, and not try and learn from those mistakes for the future, and instead just whine that it's everybody else's fault. Yes, it's everybody else's fault, but it's also the Sanders campaign's fault. And I think they owe it to their donors and supporters to ask why. And to me, one of the main problems is that Bernie Sanders, he was a very admirable human being who's devoted his life to left-wing populism and the working class, who I believe is very sincere in his views. At the same time that he was the leader of a movement that said that it was waging a political revolution against the Democratic establishment, is somebody who has worked within the halls of power for decades, and who is genuinely colleagues with and friends with and an admirer of the very leaders who he was supposed to be waging a revolution against, including Joe Biden, who we really like personally, unlike with Hillary Clinton. And as a result, the campaign had a wide array of attacks that it could have launched and should have launched against Biden. But Bernie and his wife, Jane Sanders, who ran the campaign with an iron fist, prohibited them from doing so, actually punished some of the campaign aides when they articulated those attacks, and pulled their punches, unlike what Donald Trump did in 2016 when he ran against the Republican establishment and was unlimited in his willingness to attack all of them. So I don't really see how you can wage a successful insurgent campaign that's led by somebody who's actually friends with the establishment you're trying to oppose. Bernie's a great politician, a great person, but he also was, I think, an imperfect vessel, and that messaging became very clouded. He sounded oftentimes like a conventional Democrat. At the same time, he was trying to wrestle away control of people's minds and hearts from the Democratic Party, which is very difficult to do if you're kind of critiquing them in a very muted and abstract way, but not really willing to name names and be aggressive in your denunciations.